The day my own son locked the door behind me, the cold didn't come from the weather, it came from his eyes. My name is Irene Callahan, 62 years old. I used to run a small flower stall outside the train station where every bouquet was tied with a piece of ribbon that said, "Bloom anyway." That was before Madison came into our lives, before everything that felt warm turned to frost. It was a Saturday morning in December, just after dawn. Snow drifted in lazy circles outside the window. I had just poured coffee when Madison walked into the kitchen, perfectly dressed, her lipstick a sharp winter red. She didn't look at me when she spoke. "Irene," she said flatly, "we've talked about this. It's better for everyone if you find your own place." My hands tightened around the cup. The warmth seeped into my palms, but not deep enough to reach my heart. "Better," I said softly, for whom Ethan came in then. My son, my only child. He stood behind her like a shadow, silent, conflicted, already gone. He avoided my eyes as Madison pointed to the hallway. 2 suitcases sat by the door, zipped and ready. My handwriting still clung to one of them from the days we used to travel to the lake together, Irene and Ethan summer, 2003. "You packed my things," I said. Madison's smile was polite, practiced. "You've had a good run here. We just need space. You deserve peace, and we deserve privacy." I looked at Ethan. "Do you agree with her?" He hesitated, rubbing his wedding ring. "Mom, please don't make this harder than it already is." There it was, the final cut, the kind that doesn't bleed, only freezes. I walked slowly to the door, snow already collecting on the porch outside. My reflection in the glass was faint, almost transparent. Madison lifted one suitcase. Ethan lifted the other. Neither looked at me as they set them down beside the welcome mat. I turned one last time. "You'll understand someday," I said quietly, "when the warmth you take for granted is gone." Madison folded her arms. "I hope you find what you're looking for." I smiled faintly. I already had it. The door closed behind me. Then came the sound, the click of the lock sliding into place. It echoed sharper than any word, more final than any goodbye. For a moment, I just stood there, the cold air biting at my face, the weight of my life compressed into 2 suitcases and $847 in my wallet. The street was silent except for the distant hum of a car engine and the whisper of falling snow. I set the suitcases down on the steps and breathed out. The fog from my breath curled like a small ghost, vanishing as quickly as it appeared. People say betrayal burns. They're wrong. It chills. It leaves you standing on a porch you helped pay for, wondering how love can turn into eviction. I took a slow step off the porch, my boots crunching on the thin layer of ice. The world was colorless gray sky, gray pavement, gray heart. But even in that stillness, I heard something faint, a sound from inside the house. Laughter, Madison's laughter. I stopped walking. Through the frosted glass, I could see them, a blur of motion. Ethan moving past the window, Madison reaching to touch his arm. I couldn't hear the words, but I didn't need to. The scene was clear enough, the new family they'd chosen to become, with no room for the woman who built it. I turned away. Down the block, the mailbox leaned slightly to one side. Inside a flyer stuck out an ad for Harbor Inn, cozy, affordable home away from home. I almost laughed at the irony. The home away from home was now all I had left. I picked up the flyer, folded it into my coat pocket, and started walking. The snow grew heavier, falling in thick white ribbons across the empty street. My fingers ached. My breath came out in shallow bursts. But there was a strange calm beneath the cold, a rhythm in my steps, a small, stubborn pulse of survival. When I reached the corner, I stopped again. My old house was still visible, its windows glowing with light. I imagined Ethan sipping coffee. Madison moving through the kitchen, the life I used to know continuing without me. Better for everyone, she had said. I whispered to the wind, better for whom? A gust answered back, carrying a swirl of snow around my coat, tugging at the hem like a reminder, move forward. So I did. At the bus stop, I brushed the frost from the bench and sat down. A streetlight flickered above me, buzzing faintly. I unzipped one suitcase to check what was left. A photo of Harold, my late husband, tucked between old scarves, my wedding ring still in its case, a small notebook. Inside it, on the first page, I'd once written a quote from him: "If life closes the door, don't beg to get back in. Build another one." I closed the notebook and looked up at the falling snow. Somewhere in that silence, I could almost hear his voice. I whispered, "All right, Harold, another door it is." The bus pulled up its headlights, slicing through the fog. I climbed aboard, dragging both suitcases with me. The driver, an older man with kind eyes, looked back in the mirror. "Rough morning?" he asked. "Just moving," I said, my voice steady. "Somewhere new?" He nodded. "Well, it's a good day for it. The roads are clear ahead." I sat by the window, watching the house shrink into the distance. The frost on the glass framed it like a memory, sharp at the edges, fading in the middle. By the time the bus turned the corner, it was gone. And just like that, the life I'd known ended not with a scream, not with a fight, but with the sound of a lock clicking shut. The Harbor Inn looked tired, like it had seen too many lost souls pass through its doors. The neon sign outside flickered weakly between harbor and harb, as if even the light itself couldn't hold on anymore. I paid $45 for the night cash because using my card felt too much like asking permission. The room smelled faintly of disinfectant and something older, stale air mixed with loneliness. The wallpaper peeled at the corners, and one curtain hung slightly torn, fluttering with the draft. The radio on the nightstand hissed with static, its tuning knob missing. I placed my two suitcases near the wall as if arranging the last witnesses of a trial. My knees cracked as I sat on the edge of the bed. The springs sighed beneath me, mirroring my own breath. Then a voice came from the doorway. "Irene Callahan. Is that really you?" I turned. The woman behind the counter, mid-50s, salt and pepper hair, eyes, still kind, despite the years, was Ruth Delgado, my old neighbor from Maple Street. I hadn't seen her in over a decade. "Ruth," I said, standing quickly, embarrassed by my surroundings. She stepped closer, her brow furrowed as she took in the state of the room. "You don't deserve this, Irene." Her voice cracked slightly. She looked around, then disappeared for a moment and came back with an extra blanket and a small cup of instant coffee. "Here, it's on me. I'll cover 2 nights, okay, until you figure things out." I wanted to refuse, but my throat tightened before words could form. Instead, I just nodded, whispering, "Thank you, Ruth." After she left, I sat by the small desk near the window. The frost on the glass caught the faint street light like veins of silver. I took a pen from my purse, one of the few things I'd kept from the house, and pulled out a piece of motel stationery. It had the logo printed in fading blue ink, Harbor Inn, since 1974. I began to draw. Not flowers, not houses, but a tree. Its branches bare, reaching upward as if in prayer. Its roots thick twisted, gripping deep into unseen soil. At the top, I wrote one word: life. Each branch I named love, loss, mistake, lesson, forgiveness. Some branches ended abruptly broken. Others stretched far, even though their tips were thin and frail. I paused, staring at it. The tree looked fragile but alive, its roots pushing through the paper like veins, searching for warmth. I whispered to myself, "If roots can survive the frost, so can I." The words felt heavier than prayer, steadier than hope. That night, I wrapped myself in Ruth's blanket and lay down, listening to the heater groan and sputter like an old man trying to breathe. I kept the paper under my pillow, the ink still damp, the outline of the tree smudged from my hand. Outside, snow kept falling, soft, relentless, erasing footprints, streets and memories alike. But for the first time since that door closed behind me, I didn't feel erased. In the faint hum of the broken radio, I thought I heard Harold's voice again, calm and distant. "Map it out, Irene. Life's not over. You just took a wrong turn." I smiled in the dark. "All right then," I whispered. "Let's find the way back." Morning slid through thin motel curtains. I dressed in my cleanest blouse, pressed the cuffs with the motel iron, poured 2 cups of instant coffee out of habit, one for me, one for Harold. I tucked the paper with my tree into my purse and stepped into the cold. Maple and Bloom sat on the corner of Cedar and Fifth, a narrow shop with fogged windows and a bell that chimed when I pushed the door. A man stepped from the back with a ledger under his arm pencil behind his ear. "We are not open yet," he said. "I am not here to shop," I answered. "I am here to ask for work." He studied me. "Hours are thin this time of year. I know thin." I held his gaze. "I keep books. I keep plants alive." He offered a hand. "David Flores. I handle the books here as an outside contractor. I help the owner tighten numbers. We could use part-time help sweeping, trimming inventory. I can do inventory." He led me to a back room. Rows of pots slumped on shelves, price tags faded, leaves sagged, stems papery at the tips. He gestured at them. "We write these off at month end. Dead stock." I lifted a lavender pot. The soil was chalk dry. I eased the roots from the plastic. Pale threads circled the base like a clenched fist. "They are not dead," I said quietly, "just neglected." His brow eased. "You really think you can bring them back?" "Yes," I said. "Plants do not choose despair. They respond to it." He gave me a broom. "Start with the floor, then make a list of what you think can be saved." I swept, slow strokes, corners first. A clerk named Mia brought a tray of cuttings. She asked where I learned to read plants. "From failure," I said. David checked invoices while asking calm questions about my bookkeeping. I answered with the confidence of muscle memory. By noon, I had 3 piles, recoverable by pruning and water, recoverable by repotting and light, lost for now, not forever. I clipped index cards to each shelf and wrote notes in neat print. David read them and tapped his pencil. "Your categories match our shrink reports," he said. "Your time estimates are faster than the last contractor." "I am stubborn," I said, "and I do not like waste." We ate at a tiny table by the delivery door. Mia split a sandwich. I offered the apple from my purse. David asked where I lived. I told him. The word motel caught like grit. He nodded. "Everyone starts somewhere," he said. "Direction matters." I trimmed the lavender, cut the dead tips, loosened roots, tucked warm soil around them like a blanket. I misted the leaves and set the pot near the door where the light fell in stripes. The plant looked smaller without the brittle parts, somehow braver. "You treat them like they can hear you," David said. "They can sense care," I answered. "So can people." By late afternoon, the room felt less tired. Recoverable pots lined the window, cracked ones stacked for reuse, totals tallied in columns. When I handed David the list, hope crossed his face. "Irene," he said, "let us try more than sweeping. Take 3 of the worst home. Show me what you can do by next week. If you bring them back, I will talk to the owner about a formal role, maybe a pilot program." The word home tugged at my throat. "I can do that." He picked 3. A rosemary that smelled like Sunday chicken, a fern curled into itself like a fist, a succulent puckered to the color of sage. He wrapped them in brown paper and placed them in my arms. At the counter, he slid a form across the glass. "Sign so inventory knows where they went." No charge. "Let me pay a token," I said. "Dignity prefers receipts." He wrote $2 on the line and smiled. Receipt granted. Outside, the light thinned to pewter. I tucked the plants into my canvas tote and hugged it against my coat. At the bus stop, I checked each one again. A sip of water from a paper cup, a whispered instruction Harold used to give me. "Breathe. Stay. Keep going." On the bus, I stood so the plants would not sway. At the Harbor Inn, I carried them up the stairs. Ruth looked up and grinned. "House guests," she said. "Temporary," I answered, "but important." In my room, I cleared the nightstand and opened the curtains. The rosemary took the brightest slice of window. The fern sat near the radiator. The succulent claimed the sill. I filled the ice bucket with warm water and measured sips with a paper cup. The soil darkened. Rosemary lifted. The fern loosened a fraction. The succulent seemed to breathe. I watched like a nurse, waiting for a pulse. A thin beam slid through the tear in the curtain and laid a gold stripe across the rosemary. Harold's photo rested on the dresser. I set it by the window so he could see. "We have work to do," I told him. "Stay with me." A television laughed down the hall. Heater clicked and hummed. I opened my notebook and wrote the date. I listed the 3 plants, moisture levels, repot plan, pruning schedule, morning light rotations. I drew a box around one word, begin. It was not triumph, not yet. It was the smallest pivot a person can make without breaking, a choice measured in inches, enough to steady the night. Before sleep, I brewed 2 cups again, one for me, one for Harold. I taped my drawing of the tree to the wall above the desk. On the lowest root, I wrote 3 new names, rosemary, fern, succulent, and beneath them a sentence that fit like a key. They are not dead, just neglected. Mornings at the Harbor Inn had a rhythm, the hum of old pipes, the rattle of the heater, the smell of instant coffee dissolving in paper cups. I woke before the sun most days, slipping on Harold's old cardigan, the elbows worn thin, and checked my plants like a nurse making rounds. The rosemary still looked proud. The fern was stubborn but hopeful. The succulent well, that one, was my test of faith. I used the motel's ice bucket to collect water. The tap sputtered brown at first, then cleared. I whispered the same thing every morning, easy now you've survived worse. My hands trembled a little as I pruned a brittle stem, but the motion steadied my breathing. It had been 3 weeks since I'd brought the plants home. I'd learned the timing of the light through my torn curtain, 9 minutes of gold on the rosemary, 11 on the fern. I tracked it like scripture. In those moments, my room didn't feel like a place people rented by the week. It felt like a greenhouse for the soul. The walls had stopped closing in on me. The quiet no longer screamed. I started leaving the door cracked open just a little so the smell of rosemary could wander out into the hallway. Ruth would pass by on her break and tease smells like heaven and soup in here, Irene. I'd laugh. Depends which hour you catch it. That morning, something shifted. The air was lighter charged. I set down my cup, leaned close to the rosemary, and saw it a single green sprout, pushing through dry soil, thin as a thread of silk. My breath caught. I reached out, afraid to touch it, afraid to break it. The leaf shimmered under the pale light, trembling but alive. A tear dropped onto the pot before I could stop it. I hadn't cried in months. Not when the door locked behind me, not when I counted the last bills in my wallet. But this tiny spark of green pierced through something armor-hard inside me. I whispered, "You did it. You remembered how." I didn't realize I was smiling until Ruth knocked. She peeked an apron dusted with muffin crumbs. "You're glowing again, you know," I turned toward her. "Maybe I'm photosynthesizing," I said, laughing through the lump in my throat. She came closer, looked at the plant, and gasped softly, "Would you look at that? You've got magic hands." "Just patience," I said. "Plants and people, they need the same thing. A little time and someone who doesn't give up." Ruth nodded. "Then you're finally taking your own advice." Her words lingered long after she left. For years, I'd poured every ounce of care into others. Harold, Ethan, the grandchildren I barely got to hold, while forgetting to tend to myself. But here, in this cheap motel with peeling paint and paper-thin walls, I was finally learning to nurture the only thing I could still control: hope. By evening, the fern unfurled a new leaf. Its green was so vivid against the dull beige wallpaper that it looked almost holy. I wrote in my notebook, Day 22, first sprouts. Proof that something can bloom in the unlikeliest soil. That night I fell asleep to the hum of the heater, feeling for the first time in a long while, not defeated, but alive. 3 more weeks passed. The plants grew stronger. My hands grew steadier. David stopped by one afternoon checking on my progress. He stood in the doorway blinking at the little jungle my room had become. "Irene," he said, smiling. "This looks better than half the store." I had good lighting, I teased, tugging the curtain open so sunlight washed across the pots. He crouched beside the rosemary, touched the soil, and nodded in quiet disbelief. "You really brought them back." I shrugged, trying to sound casual. They just needed someone to believe they weren't done yet. He looked at me, then, not like a pity project, but like a colleague. How would you feel about bringing a few of these back to Maple and Bloom? Let's see if customers feel what I'm seeing right now. Meaning. I'll buy them back at fair price. Call it a test sale." My chest tightened. Money hadn't been part of this. Survival had. Still, something inside me sparked the same flicker I felt when the sprout first broke through the soil. "All right," I said. "Let's test your theory." That night, I cleaned each pot, wiped the rims, even tied small tags with their names: Harold's Rosemary Ruth's, Fern Motel Succulent. I wanted the world to know these lives mattered, even if they started in a forgotten corner of a dying store. The next morning, I wrapped them in old newspaper, caught the early bus, and carried them to the shop. Mia met me at the counter. "These are the same ones you took," she asked, eyes wide. "Same routes," I said. "Just new chances." We lined them near the window where the winter light spilled in. Within an hour, a woman pointed at the rosemary and said, "This one feels happy." David smiled at me. "See?" he whispered. By noon, all three were sold. Total $280. I held the envelope of cash as if it were an artifact. It wasn't the amount, it was proof that what had once been dismissed as dead could carry worth again. David placed a hand on my shoulder. "You realize what you've done?" "Repaid a motel room," I joked, though my voice trembled. "No," he said softly. "You've turned neglect into value. That's not common." As I left the shop, wind whipped through my coat, but I barely felt the cold. The world outside hadn't changed. Still gray sidewalks, still distant sirens, but something in me had shifted. I no longer felt invisible. When I returned to my room, the empty spots on the windowsill looked lonely. I poured 2 cups of coffee again, set one beside Harold's photo, and whispered, "We sold them, love." Through the window, the late afternoon light bent across the frost, glinting like small green promises. For the first time, I believed I could grow too. By spring, my motel windowsill was a forest. Every pot was alive. Every leaf had a story. The room smelled like hope mixed with dust and disinfectant. David stopped by one afternoon carrying coffee and a small notebook. "Irene," he said, smiling, "you've outgrown this place. How about taking these beauties out into the world?" I frowned. "Out where?" He flipped his notebook open, showing a flyer. "Willow County Farmers Market. Every Saturday, booth rentals, $40. You should sell there," he said. "People love stories as much as they love plants. Give them both." I hesitated. "That's for real businesses. I'm just a woman with a few pots." David leaned forward. "No, you're a woman who brings dead things back to life. That's not a hobby, that's power." The next morning, Ruth helped me load the plants into her old pickup truck. She'd cleaned the windshield with vinegar and tied a scarf around her hair like a banner. "You sure you're ready for this, Irene?" she asked. I exhaled slowly, readier than I was for being thrown out of my own house. We parked by the row of white tents. Farmers sold jams, honey handmade soap. The air smelled of cinnamon and earth. I rented a booth near the entrance and hung a cardboard sign Ruth had painted the night before, "Green rebirth plants with a second chance." It wasn't perfect. The paint bled at the edges, but it felt true. People started to wander over. A man with a straw hat asked, "What does second chance mean?" I smiled. "It means these plants were once tossed aside. I brought them back. You can too." He nodded, bought a fern, and walked away grinning. A woman bought 2 succulents because she said they look like survivors. A teenager took photos for her Instagram, tagging "plants with purpose." By noon, my table was half empty. Ruth handed me a sandwich and snapped a photo of me behind the booth. "Smile," she said. "You're going viral, Irene." I laughed. I barely know what that means. She posted it on Facebook with the caption, "Harbor Inn's own miracle gardener, from frost to bloom." Within hours, my phone buzzed. Notifications piled up, likes, comments, hearts, some from old church friends, others from strangers who wrote, "You're inspiring, Mrs. Whitlow." I hadn't heard my last name spoken with admiration in years, but one message froze my hands. It was from Madison. "Glad you found a hobby, Irene. Must be nice having all that free time." I stared at the screen, the same coldness flooding my chest that I'd felt on the day she'd locked me out. Ruth noticed my face, pale. "Who's that from?" "Someone who mistook my silence for surrender," I said quietly. I typed slowly, deliberately 3 words. "It's not hobby." No apostrophe, no correction. Just truth, stripped bare. Then I put the phone face down. For a moment, I felt that old ache years of being dismissed, minimized, spoken over. But this time, something inside me stayed upright. The day grew warmer. Children passed by with lemonade. Dogs wagged their tails. I offered water to a little girl holding a drooping flower and told her how to revive it. She smiled, said, "You sound like my grandma," and ran off laughing. By evening, my table was nearly empty. David returned, hands in pockets, surveying the scene. "Sold out?" he asked. "Almost. 1 rosemary left." He picked it up, studying the leaves. "Keep this one," he said. "Every business needs a reminder of where it started." As the crowd thinned, Ruth and I packed the remaining pots into boxes. My hands ached, but it was a good ache, the kind that came from purpose, not exhaustion. On the drive back, Ruth turned down the radio. "You know, Irene, I haven't seen you smile like that since, well, ever." "Maybe it's the sunlight," I said, "or maybe I just stopped waiting for permission to grow." When we reached the motel, I carried the boxes up myself. The hallway smelled faintly of bleach and basil. I set the rosemary on the table beside Harold's photo. "We did it, Harold," I whispered. Our roots held. That night, I wrote in my notebook, "Green Rebirth First Sale, $460 profit. First message from Madison in months. Not hobby, life." The heater hummed softly. My hands smelled of soil and rosemary. Outside, frost began to form on the glass again, but this time I wasn't afraid of it, because I knew now frost wasn't the end. It was just a test to see what could still bloom after. Spring folded into early summer. My booth at the market no longer felt like a test. It felt like a rhythm. Friday nights meant potting mixes and tags. Saturdays meant smiles and stories. Sundays meant counting bills that smelled faintly of basil. Yet even in the small joy of steady sales, I could feel a ceiling above my head. The motel room was a greenhouse only by stubborn imagination. The hallway was not a loading dock. Hope needed a roof that was mine. David saw it before I said a word. He showed up at the market with a clipboard, and that look he got when numbers started arranging themselves like soldiers in his mind. "Irene," he said, tapping the board, "you are outgrowing your square footage. You need a proper space, a small warehouse, a sink that does not cough rust. There's a microloan program that fits people like you, people like me." I repeated, half teasing, half afraid. "Persistent," he said, "not reckless. The difference matters." He slid a brochure into my hand, Community Development Microloan, up to $60,000 for equipment, leasehold improvements, and initial working capital. The paper felt heavier than it should. $60,000 was not a roofing nail, it was a beam. 60 sounds like a mountain, I said. "Mountains are just hills stacked neatly," he answered. "We will stack neatly." Ruth met us that evening at a diner off Route 7. We took the corner booth under the buzzing light. She brought a folder with her stuffed with photos she had taken at the market. Customers smiling with armfuls of green. My hands dirt under the nails, tying a ribbon around a revived rosemary. "These go with the application," she said. "People need to see faces. Even when the channel is faceless, the heart is not." I let out a breath I did not know I was holding. "What if they say no?" I asked. "What if I am the motel lady who grows hope but cannot grow past a door chain?" David sipped his coffee. He set the cup down with the patience that had carried me this far. "Then we adjust and try again. But we do not reject ourselves before anyone else can." The next week turned into a procession of lists. I wrote an executive summary at the wobbly motel desk. Mission vision, what problem we solved. Green Rebirth rehabilitates end-of-season and distressed plants, reduces waste, turns loss into revenue, teaches patience as a practice. I drew a simple process map with arrows intake, triage, soil renewal, water cycles, sunlight schedule, staging, sale. It looked like a hospital chart for the stubbornly alive. Inventory sheets followed. I counted pots, trays, racks, bags of soil. I estimated yields per month by species. David helped me build a revenue model with 3 streams: direct market sales, wholesale return to garden centers, subscription windowsill kits for apartment dwellers who needed green in small doses. He set conservative assumptions. He refused to let me hide from costs: lease, utilities, transport, supplies, 2 part-time hires, a used cargo van with a door that actually closed. At night, under the yellow lamp that turned the motel room into a quiet theater, I typed until my wrists complained. I checked spelling twice. I added semicolons where breath belonged. I wrote about losses that had become lessons, about frost that had become a teacher. I wrote a single line that made my throat tighten. We are not in the plant business. We are in the second chance business. The financial section scared me most. Projections were promises you had not earned yet, but I learned to let the numbers speak without apology. When fear pressed, I stood and brewed 2 cups of coffee. One I set beside Harold's photo. Steam rose like a small prayer. On the final night, I added a page titled Community Impact. Ruth insisted. Fewer plants in dumpsters, more green in apartments that had only seen gray, seasonal workshops for seniors at the library, a stipend program for teenagers to learn patience through dirt. The application no longer felt like a plea. It felt like a plan. I printed everything at the library. The copier chugged and warmed the pages as if blessing them with breath. Back at the motel, I assembled the packet with a paper clip that fought me like a small dragon. I wrote a cover letter by hand. My pen paused at the salutation, then moved. I used the sentence that had been growing in me since the farmer's market. Paperwork speaks louder than apology. I stared at the words, surprised by their firmness. Apologies had been plentiful in my life, often late, often conditional. Paperwork had signatures, dates, obligations, consequences. Paperwork could move keys across a desk. Paperwork could deliver space. The morning I submitted the application, my hands trembled so hard the pages rustled. David came with me to the nonprofit lender's office. He did not hover. He stood near a steady shape. The loan officer, a woman with kind eyes and a pen that flashed gold, leafed through the packet with small nods. You have a compelling case, she said, and a track record that shows sweat rather than talk. I swallowed. Sweat I have, I said, trying to smile. 3 weeks, she said. That is our review timeline. 3 weeks became a practice in breathing. I worked, I watered, I sold. I taught a Saturday mini class on reviving supermarket herbs. I replied to a message from a young man who said his grandmother had started a basil on her windowsill because of a photo Ruth posted. I forgot for an hour at a time to check my email. Then I remembered and checked, heart skittering. On the 19th day, I found a white envelope in my mailbox at the motel. No return address I recognized, only my name, Irene Whitlow, typed cleanly. The hallway smelled of bleach. Someone's television laughed behind a door. My hands shook as I broke the seal. Approved. 1 word. Centered. Black ink. Unmistakable. Below it, terms. Interest. Disbursement steps. A meeting date. I stared until the letters blurred. Then the paper pressed against my chest because my arms had moved without asking. I was hugging a decision. The sound that came out of me was not dainty. It was a half sob, half laugh. Ruth rounded the corner. She took 1 look at my face and broke into a run. "Tell me that is what I think it is," she said. I handed her the letter. She read the first line. She whooped. She grabbed my shoulders. "See," she said, tears glinting, the world finally wrote back. We sat on the carpeted stairs like 2 girls who had just passed an exam. David arrived minutes later, breathless from taking the steps 2 at a time. He read the letter, exhaled a long, relieved sound, then pulled a pen from his shirt pocket and said, "Now we make a list." The meeting at the lender's office felt different from the first. It felt like entering through a door someone had unlocked because I had earned a key. We reviewed disbursement, lease parameters, insurance, the timeline for the first tranche. The officer highlighted a line about responsible growth. I nodded like a student who loved homework more than recess. Afterward, David drove me to a light industrial strip on the west side of town. He parked in front of a narrow unit with a roll-up door and a small glass entry. Inside, there were concrete floors, a utility sink, a row of high windows where stubborn light insisted on entering. I could see it racks along the walls, a potting table in the center, a whiteboard with schedules, a corner where Harold's picture would sit beside a kettle. "What do you think?" David asked. I stepped to the middle of the empty space. I closed my eyes. I could smell soil that was not yet there. I could hear the soft sound of leaves when they forget fear and turn toward sun. I think I said, opening my eyes, that the frost has finally met its match. We signed a reservation agreement that afternoon. The agent slid the paper across the counter. I held the pen and felt a small tremor, the good kind, the kind that says you know you are crossing a bridge that will not collapse. I wrote my name cleanly. I dated the line. Paper met ink. Fear met fact. That night, back at the motel, I brewed 2 cups of coffee. I set one by Harold. I placed the approval letter under his photo like a ribbon won at a fair. I wrote 3 sentences in my notebook before sleep took me. Approved. Lease pending. Paperwork speaks louder than apology. Outside, the summer air held its breath. Inside, I let mine go. Slow, grateful, steady. 3 years can feel like a blink or a lifetime depending on what you do with them. For me, they were both. In the blink of an eye, the motel key was replaced by a brass one that opened the door to Willowbrook Estate, a $3.9 million property nestled among oaks and manicured hedges, just 5 blocks from where my son once told me I didn't belong. Green Rebirth had grown into something larger than I ever dared to imagine. 14 employees, 2 trucks, 1 greenhouse with panels that opened automatically at dawn. The same species of plants that used to be tossed aside now filled boutique stores, corporate lobbies, and hotel atriums across the state. What started as a second chance for wilted plants had become a movement about second chances for people too. Every Monday morning we had meetings around a long, reclaimed wood table David built himself. Each chair had a name tag handwritten by Ruth, who now handled community programs. Our apprentices included 2 teenagers from the foster system and 1 retired veteran who said the smell of soil steadied his nerves more than therapy ever did. I was no longer the motel lady. I was the founder, the mentor, the woman whose name appeared in green letters on company invoices. Yet even with success printed on paper, I still woke at 5 a.m. to brew 2 cups of coffee, 1 for me, 1 for Harold, and stand by the window until the sun stretched across the hill. The morning I moved into Willowbrook, I arrived before the movers. I wanted a moment with the silence. The house was large but not loud. Its beauty came from the quiet, the way light fell through tall windows, how the marble floor reflected the soft gold of morning. The realtor, a young woman in heels too sharp for comfort, handed me the keys with a bright smile. "Congratulations, Mrs. Whitlow. Not every woman builds an empire from soil." I smiled faintly. "Soil has memory," I said. "It knows who kept watering when no one believed anything could grow." She didn't quite understand, but that was all right. Not everyone needed to. When the movers finished, I carried the last box myself, a small one marked personal. Inside was Harold's photo, the first sprout I ever revived from maple in bloom and the motel sketch of the tree with bare branches. I placed them on the living room shelf under the morning light. That night, after everyone left, I walked barefoot across the new wooden floor. The air smelled faintly of lemon polish and promise. Through the balcony doors, I could see the town stretching out below the grocery store, the church spire, and beyond them, Maple Street. 5 blocks away behind those roofs was Ethan's house. I stood there for a long time holding my cup of chamomile tea. The same hands that once trembled over motel paperwork now rested steady against the iron railing. The warmth of the cup seeped into my palms, and for the first time I realized how quiet success could feel. Not loud, not vengeful, just quietly certain. I whispered to Harold's photo resting on the table behind me. "We made it, love. We're home again, but this time no one can send us away." The next morning, the newspaper arrived at my gate wrapped in a blue rubber band. I almost ignored it, but Ruth called an hour later, her voice bubbling through the phone. "Have you seen it yet?" "Seen what? Page 1 of the Willow County Times. You're famous." I unfolded the paper. The front headline, printed in bold serif letters, read, "Local Woman Turns, Discarded Plants into $1 Million Empire." Below it was a photograph me standing in front of the new greenhouse, holding a potted rosemary. The sunlight caught the gray in my hair, turning it silver instead of dull. The reporter had quoted me, "What others throw away isn't always broken. Sometimes it's just waiting for someone to see it differently." I sat at the marble island reading the article while my tea cooled. Every paragraph felt like a quiet vindication. For years, my name had been whispered as pity or shame. Now it was printed in ink and pride. Ruth dropped by with muffins still warm from the oven. David followed a few minutes later, holding a folded copy of the same newspaper, grinning. "You're officially a headline, Irene," he said. "You've gone from motel guest to market vendor to mansion owner. What's next? Senate?" I laughed a full laugh that filled the room. "No politics for me. I'll stick to plants. They lie less." He raised his cup. "To second chances." I clinked mine against his. "And to paperwork that speaks louder than apology." Outside sunlight spilled across the garden beds where the movers had placed my surviving motel plants. The rosemary, the lavender, and the stubborn ivy, all standing strong under the same sun that once watched me shiver on a frozen porch. Later that afternoon, I took a slow walk around the property. The fountain in the courtyard trickled softly, a bird perched on the rim dipping its beak into the water. The air smelled of earth after rain, though it hadn't rained in days. I ran my fingers along the stone wall, feeling its coolness against my skin. At the far edge of the property near the wrought iron gate, a delivery driver honked and handed me another envelope. Inside was an invitation Green Rebirth had been nominated for the State Small Business Resilience Award. I smiled, folded the paper, and tucked it into my pocket without fanfare. Recognition was nice, but peace, that was the real prize. That evening, I stood again on the balcony with a cup of tea. The same direction, the same horizon, but everything had changed. From here, I could see the faint rooftops of my old street, the one where Madison once shouted, "It's better for everyone." I whispered softly, "Better for me after all." The light hit my hands just then, those same hands that had once trembled while counting $84 in the cold. Now they were still sure and warm. I stayed there until the sun dipped low, turning everything gold. For the first time, I wasn't looking back to mourn. I was looking down, not in bitterness, but in grace. Because sometimes the sweetest view isn't from revenge, it's from recovery. The doorbell rang at 9:17. A bright two-tone chime rolled through the marble foyer like a stone across water. I set my tea down and walked to the wall panel by the staircase. The security screen bloomed to life. 4 faces stood at my gate: Ethan, Madison, Ella 12, Noah 9. Their coats were zipped to the chin. Their smiles were careful and rehearsed. For a second, I only watched. The iron scrollwork cast shadows across their cheeks. The winter light made everyone honest. I pressed the intercom button and kept my voice level. "Good morning." Madison leaned toward the camera. Her lipstick was the same coral she wore the day she told me to leave. "We just came to congratulate you, Mom." I let the word settle. Mom, a word with teeth used like a key. "Thank you," I said. "What brings you by so early?" "We were in the neighborhood," she said, "and the kids wanted to see you." Noah shifted behind her. He held a folded brochure for the community pool. Ella lifted a small paper bag. I could see the edge of a bakery label, croissants. It was a good prop. Flaky, golden, harmless. The phone on the console table buzzed. I picked it up and tucked it under my chin. "Ruth." "You okay?" she asked. "I saw a familiar minivan at your gate." "I'm about to find out," I said. "Stay by your phone." I keyed the gate. It swung inward with a soft hum. They walked up the long path as if it were a red carpet. I opened the front door before they could knock again. Cold air reached into the foyer and touched the sunlight on the floor. Ethan stopped at the threshold. His eyes roamed the chandelier, the staircase, the high windows. He looked older than yesterday's memory. The gray at his temples matched the December sky. "Mom," he said. "You look good." "I am warm and caffeinated," I said. "That helps." Madison extended the paper bag. "From Leona's. Your favorite." "Thank you," I said. I did not step aside yet. I wanted the moment to teach its own lesson. You cannot walk into someone else's house on the strength of a pastry. I let silence make its small cuts. Then I widened the door and gestured. "Come in." They crossed the threshold. The foyer swallowed them and made their voices smaller. Ella stared up at the chandelier. Noah stared at his shoes. Madison smoothed her coat with the back of her hand and shivered in a way that suggested delicate bones. "This is beautiful," she said. "So much space." "Space is honest," I said. "It does not pretend to be smaller than it is." I took their coats and hung them on the standing rack. In the living room, the fire was set to a quiet burn. Sunlight moved like silk across the rug. I pointed them to the sofa. They did not sit all the way back. People who plan to ask for something rarely do. I brought plates, cups, and the croissants. The room smelled of butter and orange marmalade. I poured tea for the children first. Their hands were a little pink from the cold. "Thank you, Grandma," Ella said. Her voice was careful. "Your house looks like a magazine. It looks like peace," I said. "Magazines cannot sell you that." Madison crossed her legs and gave me the smile she uses on receptionists. "We read the article," she said. "What a story. From motel to mansion. Incredible." "Thank you," I said. "What did you like best?" She blinked. "All of it. The resilience. The entrepreneurship. The fact that you did it at your age. 40 is an age," I said. 70 is a privilege." Ethan cleared his throat. "Mom, we were wrong about many things. We have been talking a lot lately. We want to make things right. Talking is a beginning," I said. "Beginnings ask for proof." Ella sipped her tea and glanced between us. Noah picked at the edge of his napkin. The fire made a soft, ticking sound. Harold's photo rested on the shelf by the window, half lit. Madison leaned forward, elbows on knees. "Ethan is between jobs," she said. "You know how the market is. The house is cramped. The kids need quiet to study, and this place has so much room. We thought it might be practical." "Practical," I said. "For whom?" "For everyone," she said, bright again. I let my eyes move from the mantel to the windows to their faces. I slowed my breathing. Calm is a lever when the other person is sprinting. Practical is a budget, I said. A schedule, a plan. Practical does not knock with croissants. Color rose in Madison's cheeks. The smile tightened. She tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. "I want to be clear," she said. "We are not asking for charity. We can contribute. Groceries, errands, housekeeping. The schools are excellent here. Ella could walk to her math tutor. Noah could bike to the park. It would be a win for the whole family." "Family," I said. A strong word. Ethan looked at the floor. "Mom, we miss you." I thought about the frost on my hands that first night. I thought about the motel key on its frayed tag. I thought about the first sprout that lifted its head against the window. I set my cup down. The porcelain made a small, precise sound. "Madison," I said, "please say what you came to say." Her jaw worked once. Then she straightened. "Fine," she said. "We are moving in." The sentence landed in the room like an iron weight. The fire ticked. A log shifted. Outside, a bird snapped a twig and flew. Ella's cup paused halfway to her lips. Noah stopped breathing for a beat. Ethan's eyes squeezed shut for half a second, then opened. Silence did the rest. It folded itself around the words and held them up to the light. I let the edges glint. Then I smiled. Not cruel, not soft, just exact. Into where exactly? Madison spread her hands. "The guest wing," she said. "There are 3 rooms and a bath. We could make it easy for you, help with the garden, keep you company. You should not be alone in a house this large." "Alone," I said. "An assumption." Ethan tried again. "We want to rebuild. We know the past was messy. We know we hurt you. Hurt is weather, I said. It passes. Character is climate. Ella set her cup down carefully. Dad told us you like to read in the mornings. I like the silence in the mornings, I said. Books are a door to it. Noah lifted the pool brochure. They have swim lessons on Saturdays, he said quietly. Could we swim if we lived here? You could swim if you visited, I said. Visiting is not the same as residing. Madison exhaled through her nose. So that is a no. That is a question, I said. Do you hear what you just asked me to forget? We are trying to make amends, she said. We came here with respect. Respect knocks, I said. It does not announce a move-in plan before a conversation. Her mouth flattened. Ethan rubbed the bridge of his nose. Ella folded her hands in her lap. Noah looked at the fire and then at me. I remained very still. Stillness unsettles people who expect either fury or surrender. My calm made the room colder than December. The chandelier gave a faint crystal sigh. Somewhere in the house, a vent opened with a soft breath. Mom Ethan said finally, "What would it take to start over?" "A beginning," I said, "and an ending. Tell your children the truth about how I left, then show me a plan you made without my money, then come back as guests who respect a host." Madison's head tilted. "You would keep your own family out, in this much space." "Peace needs room to walk," I said. "I had to clear some hallways." She stood. The sofa cushion rose and fell under her weight. She looked around the living room as if to memorize it. Her hand slid over the silk pillow and paused at the edge of the Persian rug. She wanted me to see her touch value. I let her have the performance. Ethan did not stand. He watched me closely. There was a question in his eyes and a shadow behind it. Ella traced the rim of her cup. Noah unfolded the brochure and folded it again. Children measure truth by the quiet that follows it. I rose and smoothed the front of my sweater. "Tea is finished," I said. "You may walk the garden before you go." The rosemary by the south wall came from a clearance rack. It prefers morning light and patience. Madison's mouth twitched. "Like you? Like anyone worth keeping," I said. We moved back through the foyer. I helped the children with their coats. I opened the front door and let the winter step inside for a moment. It smelled clean, honest. On the threshold, Madison turned. "We will talk," she said. "Soon." "Talk is the easy part," I said. "Bring truth." They walked the path toward the gate. Their steps made quick sounds on the stone. Ella glanced back once and lifted her hand. I lifted mine in return. Ethan touched the gate code and looked over his shoulder. His lips pressed into a line of apology he had not yet earned. When the gate closed, the chime echoed again down the hall. I stood in the foyer until the air warmed back to quiet. Then I picked up the phone and called Ruth. "Well," she said. "How was the parade?" "Short," I said. "Loud at the start, silent at the end." "You need muffins," she said. "I need sunlight," I said, "and a lock that works." I hung up and turned toward the living room. The fire lifted and settled. On the shelf, Harold's photo caught a thin bar of light. I breathed in and out until my chest felt steady the way it does when a storm passes and the sky stays blue. Madison had given me a sentence made of stone. I had returned it with a question made of glass. Stone falls. Glass shows you yourself. The next afternoon, the winter light fell softer over the house. Ruth had stopped by with lemon muffins, left them on the porch, and texted, "You'll need them soon." I didn't ask how she knew. In this town, truth traveled faster than gossip. At exactly 3:15, the doorbell rang again. I looked through the camera, Ethan, Madison, and the children standing close together this time. Their posture said truce. Their eyes said performance. Still, I opened the door. Some lessons needed witnesses. "Come in," I said. "Let's talk where it's warm." The living room smelled of rosemary and chamomile. Steam curled from the teapot on the low table. I had set 4 cups. The 5th remained empty in case silence needed one of its own. The fire was steady, patient. They entered hesitantly. Madison's perfume, expensive cold, floated a second before dissolving into the scent of tea leaves. The children sat on the couch, first knees together, quiet. Ethan stood behind them. Madison perched on the edge of the chair, chin high, smile fixed. I poured tea without hurry. The sound filled the quiet, thin and deliberate. Then Ella broke it. "Grandma," she said, voice small but clear. "Why didn't we see you for so long?" The question hung in the air. I could have deflected it with an easy lie, but lies are heavy to carry. Truth travels lighter, even when it cuts. I looked at her. Not Madison, not Ethan, only the child who deserved an honest map. "I wasn't away by choice, sweetheart," I said softly. "I was asked to leave." Ethan's head moved slightly, almost a flinch. Madison's jaw stiffened. She forced a laugh. "Mom, that's not fair. You weren't asked to leave. You were interfering. You know that." "We needed space." I placed my cup down carefully. "Interfering," I repeated. "That's the word you used back then, too." She frowned. "Excuse me." I reached into the drawer under the coffee table. Inside was a small manila envelope labeled 2019. I took out a single printed page, one message I had kept, not for vengeance but for memory. I handed it to Ethan. "Maybe it's time we all look at what space really meant." Ethan hesitated, then unfolded the paper. His eyes scanned the first line, froze, then lowered. I watched the exact second recognition hit, the way his breathing shortened the color, draining from his face. He whispered, "Madison." Ella leaned closer. "Dad." He couldn't speak, so I read it aloud quietly, each word its own verdict. "Either she's out or I'm gone." Madison's face went pale. "That was private," she said quickly, taken out of context. "We were under stress." I stopped her with a small gesture. 3 years ago, you gave him that choice. He chose you. I packed 2 suitcases and left before the first frost. That was context. Silence spread again, wider this time, filling corners, moving through walls. The children looked from their parents to me, confusion tightening into understanding. Ethan folded the paper with shaking hands. "I never thought she'd keep it." "I keep many things," I said, not to weaponize them, but to remember who I became after them. Madison found her voice again brittle. "You could have called. You could have—" "I did," I said. 7 times. Each time the call went to voicemail. The 8th time, the number was blocked. Her lips parted, but no words came. Noah finally spoke, barely above a whisper. "Dad, did you really tell Grandma to leave?" Ethan looked at his son, his eyes wet, his mouth trembling. "No," he said, then corrected himself. "Yes, I let it happen." He bowed his head. The weight of 3 years fell forward onto his knees. Ella reached for my hand, her small fingers tentative. "Grandma, where did you go?" "To a motel first," I said, "then to a greenhouse that needed tending. Plants don't ask about shame. They only ask for light." Her eyes glistened. "Were you scared?" "Yes," I said, "but fear grows roots too if you water it right." For a long moment, none of us spoke. The only sound was the crack of wood shifting in the fireplace. Madison stood abruptly. "This is turning into a trial, and I won't be cross-examined in front of my kids." I looked at her evenly. "It's not a trial, it's history finding its voice." Ethan raised his head. "Madison, stop." She turned startled. "Excuse me." I said, "Stop." He repeated quietly but firm. "I saw the messages. I saw what I allowed. You told me she was toxic. You said I had to choose, and I did. I chose wrong." He looked at me then, and for the first time in years, his voice trembled with something that sounded like truth. "Mom, I'm sorry." The words were small but real. I nodded. "I don't need an apology. I need acknowledgement. They are not the same thing." Madison crossed her arms. "So what now? You keep reminding us we failed. You think that makes you better." "No," I said. "It makes me whole." She scoffed. "You think this house makes you powerful?" "This house makes me visible," I said. "I was invisible for too long." She looked around the room, eyes darting to the chandelier, the art, the light. She wanted to wound, to find weakness, but the air itself had turned against her. "You threw me out with 2 suitcases," I said softly but with precision. "Now you show up empty-handed." The sentence hung like smoke. Even the fire seemed to pause. Madison's mouth opened, then closed. Ethan pressed his palms together, elbows on knees staring at the floor. The children sat very still, old enough to recognize shame when it breathed. I leaned forward, my voice low, almost tender. I don't say this to humiliate anyone. I say it because truth left too long in silence becomes poison. Today we clean the air. Noah blinked hard. Ella wiped her cheek. Madison looked down for the first time, seeing maybe not guilt yet, but reflection. Ethan finally lifted his eyes. "Mom, can we visit again?" "Properly without all this," I smiled faintly. "Properly begins with honesty. It doesn't live under the same roof as denial." He nodded slowly. "Understood." I poured the last of the tea. The room felt lighter, not happy, not healed, but oxygenated. Outside, sunlight touched the frost on the windows, turning it into small glints of silver. Inside, the warmth held. Truth had finally entered the house, and it did not knock first. PP. They stood at the threshold like a storm that had lost the will to rage. Madison's eyes were flint and fire. Ethan's were the gray of ash after the burn. The children hovered between them, 2 small anchors trying to keep a listing boat from tipping again. The long pause felt like a room learning to breathe. Irene Ethan began, voice thin but steady. "I am sorry. I missed the years I should have protected you. I want to make it right. I want another chance." I met his eyes. No theatrics, no raised voice, just the steady truth that had taken root. "You'll have to earn that back, not ask for it." He nodded, the words landing like weather he could not change. "I understand." Madison drew in a sharp breath. "So that is it. Trial over. Sentence pronounced." She reached for the doorknob like a gavel. "That is not a sentence," I said. "It is a boundary. Boundaries are where love remembers its shape." Her fingers tightened, then loosened. She looked at Ethan as if daring him to fight. He did not. Ella reached for Noah's hand. The children watched their parents the way travelers watch a map. I knelt to the kid's height. "You too," I said. "Softer now. My door's open for you always. You can visit to do homework, to drink cocoa, to water the lemon tree, to tell me about spelling bees and lost teeth. You do not need an appointment to be loved." Noah's shoulders dropped, breath finally leaving his chest. Ella nodded, eyes bright with relief and something like wonder. "Thank you," Ethan said, the words more breath than sound. Madison tried one last volley. "You cannot keep them from us." "I am keeping nothing," I answered. "I am offering a place where truth can grow. That is different from leverage, different from punishment. It is soil." No one moved. Then the gate bell chimed, a small sound that felt like a nudge from the future. I walked them out along the stone path. The camellias were open, winter roses holding their own against the cold. At the iron gate, the wind lifted a corner of Madison's scarf. She pinned it down with impatience she could not hide. "Ethan," she said, lips thin, "we are leaving." He looked from her to me, then to the children. "We will be in touch," he said. This time he chose a simple sentence over a promise he could not keep. They climbed into the car. The engine turned, a low animal ready to go anywhere but here. Ella rolled down her window. "Grandma," she called, "can we come Saturday to plant the seeds you showed us?" "Yes," I said. "Saturday. Bring shoes, you can get muddy." She grinned. The car curved down the drive, tail lights blinking at each bend, then gone. The wind dropped, a quieter hush returning to the hedges and stone. I stood with my palm on the cool iron of the gate. The metal held steady, built to keep out what wounded and invite in what healed. When the road fell silent, I turned toward the garden. Work waited. Work always does. And I have learned this is mercy. The hose lay coiled like a green question at the foot of the pergola. I unspooled it and walked the beds with slow attention. Water woke dark soil, the sound as calming as a prayer said by hands. The terracotta pots that once held twigs now held leaves. Parsley feathered, thyme thickened, lavender released its clean ache. Every bed told the same story in a different accent. Broken, tended, returned. On the patio table, the silver teacup caught light. I set it by the rosemary, a small offering to the ordinary. Nearby, Harold's old house slippers rested where I had left them, their shape familiar as a held hand. I watered the citrus trees and thought of the letter he wrote me years ago. If you ever get lost, plant something. It will lead you home. He had been right. Roots are a compass. Green is a map. Ruth's footsteps sounded on the gravel path. She carried a tote of seed packets and a lopsided smile. I brought reinforcements, she said. Calendula. Always a good idea for skin and for spirits. You were listening again, I said. I never stopped, she replied, placing the packets in my palm. How did it go? As it should, I said. No fireworks, just weather changing. She studied my face. Read the lines the way gardeners read leaves. You look taller, she said, like your spine set. Maybe it did, I said. Maybe peace is posture. She laughed, a warm sound that made the rosemary tremble. Saturday. I will bring cocoa for the kids, she said. We will teach them the 3 rules. Patience, water, sun. If we do not rush a plant, we should not rush a person. Good, I said. We will start with soil that drains but holds. Ruth squeezed my arm, then let go. I will leave you to your watering, she said, heading back toward the side gate. Call if you need extra hands or extra cocoa. When she was gone, I moved to the shade bed and adjusted a stake so a young stem could lean without breaking. The small correction felt like a lesson I had failed for years and had finally learned. Support does not smother, it steadies. The hose hissed, stopped, hissed again. I turned the spigot down so the water could arrive as a kindness rather than a flood. Mrs. Callahan, a voice at the fence. Lily from next door, 10 years old, red knit cap, cheeks the color of apples in October. She held a little watering can with daisies painted on the side. Mom said to ask before I come in. You may, I said, but bring careful feet. She slipped through the gate, steps precise and proud. Can I help water them? Be gentle, I said, placing the hose in her hands, guiding her grip. Some of them were broken once too. She nodded like a promise, eyes intent on each pot as if it were a sleeping bird. Water beaded, ran, soaked, stilled. She moved to the next, and the next, humming something soft and off-key. The sound landed like a stitch in cloth. A car door thudded in the distance, a neighbor, a delivery, the world keeping its rhythm. Above us, the sky widened. The low winter sun stretched across the lawn and caught on the cut edges of the boxwood, each leaf a small mirror. The phone in my pocket buzzed. A text from Ethan. Thank you for not closing the door on them. I will send a schedule for visits. I will start with truth. I read it, let it sit, replied with 2 words. Start now. I turned off the hose. Lily set down her can as if it might wake if she dropped it. Will they be okay? She asked, pointing to a row of rescued roses, woody and stubborn and lovely. They will, I said. They have everything they need, time, room, light. She smiled and ran back toward her yard, small sneakers turning gravel into music. The garden exhaled. So did I. I gathered the empty terracotta pots, stacked them by size, wiped the soil from my palms onto a towel hung on the back of a chair. In the kitchen, I filled the kettle, set it on the flame, watched as the metal gathered heat. The house felt aligned, the rooms in agreement with the person living in them. On the counter, a copy of the loan papers rested under a paperweight, not as a trophy, but as a record that paper can speak when people refuse to. Steam rose. I poured tea into the silver cup, set another for Harold, a habit that made sense to me if to no one else. I carried both to the back steps and sat where the flagstones still held a little sun. The garden moved in small ways. A sparrow landed on the fence, thought it over, stayed. A bee stitched a clumsy line between two rosemary spires. Early, ambitious, sure. The lemon tree shook once, a silent laugh. I raised the cup and found my ending. Not the slam of a door, not the high note of triumph, but the low, sure chord of a life that finally tuned itself. They threw me away like wilted leaves, but I learned being discarded is sometimes how sunlight finds you. Revenge isn't anger. It's peace that no one can take away. When life throws you out into the cold, remember sometimes that's where the roots of freedom start to grow. Irene's story isn't about revenge. It's about reclaiming dignity, one seed, one truth, and one quiet victory at a time. She learned that peace isn't found in the house you own. It's in the garden you tend within yourself. If this story touched you, take a moment to share where you're watching from. I love seeing our community from every corner of the world. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the bell so you won't miss the next story of healing justice and quiet strength. Scroll down to the pinned comment for today's reflection question and join the conversation in the hashtags below.